So let's call to order our Climate Action Commission meeting for today, the 13th of September. Fraser is here. Stratus is missing in action. Grim?
Here.
Megan Hill?
Here.
Grace? Casey Hutchinson?
Here.
Matt Krieger?
Here.
Jesse? Becky? Eric?
Here.
Thank you all very much for your.
Band is here. Sorry. Via Zoom.
Yep, got you. Thank you.
Thanks.
What we discovered, Jesse, just for your information, is being online is good, but if we need a quorum, it doesn't count. The online people don't count, just for future reference. But I'm glad you're here because we have a presentation I think that we'll all find interesting today. So the next matter is not the August minutes, because we didn't meet in August, but the July 12th minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the July 12th minutes, assuming that we have taken the time in the last couple of months to actually look at those?
I did send a few corrections just on some spellings of some names, but other than that.
Okay.
I sent those directly to Sarah and Rachel.
So with the requirement for a couple corrections, your motion is to accept? All right. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Public comments of items not on the agenda. Or do we have any outside visitors today? Okay. Public comment of items not on the agenda. Nothing. Staff announcements.
All right, we'll begin with action items from the last meeting, which, as you may recall, was held in July. The first action item was for staff to forward the equity report on to City Council. That was done. The second was to coordinate with Cause Impacts to present on their phase 1 findings. We are joined by them today. The third item was for working groups to review and advise on the use of ARPA funds in Iowa City. Thank you to all the working groups who did do that. We included the notes from the working groups in with the packet that was forwarded on to City Council, so they did receive your recommendations. And the final note was to determine the next location for our meeting, which of course is here. This will be where we'll be holding our meetings for the foreseeable future. It has the space to socially distance and the tech needs, so that if we have a presentation like this, we can accommodate it. I'm just going to say, so that it's entered into our minutes, we have discovered that in order to count as a public meeting, we need to have 6 members, assuming we have a full commission. We need to have 6 members physically present at the meeting. So folks can request to attend the meeting remotely if you have a compelling health reason. Those health reasons would be defined as having COVID symptoms yourself, or if your family member has COVID symptoms, if you have reason to believe you have recently been exposed, or if you or a family member are immunocompromised, you can request that we give you a call-in option. But please do be aware that means it will not count toward attendance or toward quorum. It'll be counted as an excused absence. So hopefully it's good to have some clarity on that for moving forward. And those were all of the action items from the last meeting. The other staff announcement was as to the updated action plan report. This was included in the minutes of the last meeting, or in the agenda packet rather, and we included it again in the packet for today. What we thought we would do in order to save the most amount of time for the presentation from Cause Impacts, rather than run through those items one by one, is just ask if anybody has any questions about the updated items. I inflected that weird, so I'll say, does anybody have any questions?
I think there may be some items that were on the buildings, a couple of the buildings items that it might be good to have just some updates maybe to the buildings working group. So I'll forward those to you to see if we can just get some clarification around that. But I'll in writing. That way we have it.
Sounds good. Thanks, Matt. The other working groups can feel free to do the same. Next month, we will return to our schedule of having office updates every other month. The office update, of course, next time will include all 3 months and rather than the 2 we normally do due to the meeting that was canceled in August. All right. And I'll just say so that it's entered into the minutes, we've been joined by Stratus now. All right. That takes care of the staff announcements.
So old business, we have a presentation. Our presenters were with us last month, but we were unable to have a quorum. And so we asked them, and they were very generous to return to give a presentation today. So let's move ahead to that, please.
All right. Well, hello again. For those of you who were not at the last meeting, we'll just do a quick round of introductions of our team that's on the call today, and then we'll dive right in. So hi, I'm Jessica Doherty. I'm the principal of Cause Impacts. Cause Impacts is a social impact strategy consulting firm. So we work on social justice issues from environmental justice to criminal justice reform and education across the United States. This project is especially interesting to us because of the fact that the city of Iowa City really is known as like a hub of being innovative and really trying to make a huge impact on the climate, and you are. And so we're excited to work with all of you. Don't be so grateful that we're here. We're excited to work with you all. And I'll pass it to Natalie and then Steve.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Lehmann. I'm the Senior Research Analyst for Cause Impacts. So my background is in nonprofit work and then higher education, as well as social and environmental justice, as Jessica mentioned. So I am so excited to be here. I think I can speak for our whole team that says that we are obsessed with Iowa City now after doing all of this research. And it's been a really great experience. So I'm just so happy to be here and to present to you today.
And hi there, I'm Steve Cardenas. I am the principal of ISCI Communications, a marketing strategy and consulting firm. We specialize in doing branding, messaging, communications programs, marketing programs for a variety of different industries. And this has been an incredible passion project for us. And we're excited to get started.
Great, so with that, I'm gonna share my screen here. So this presentation, we're going to walk through our methodology, like what we researched, how we researched, just give you some overall overarching global findings. Then also we want to give you some findings by the different audience segments, because if we're going to be developing a marketing campaigns, we need to figure out how to communicate best with different people. Then really talk about the barriers and benefits, which was the crux of a lot of this research. And then talk about some potential recommendations. We're not yet to the recommendations and strategies phase, which is next. But of course, after this process, we have some potential recommendations and steps. And we want to leave plenty of time for questions. If you have a question you're dying to ask during the presentation, please don't hesitate to ask it. And we'll have 20 to 30 minutes at the end for questions too. So if you prefer to just take notes as we talk, to not forget them, that's great too. All right, so I just want to remind everyone of our charge. So the city of Iowa City really seeks to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. You've already exceeded your goals, and I know you're announcing some stuff at Climate Fest next week. So you're doing a great job. And there's 35 community actions that were identified within that cap, the cap to help reduce greenhouse gases. But obviously all of you recognize there's some of those actions that are harder to change people's behaviors around. And so our research was really focused on how to change people's behaviors for harder to change activities and make the most impact on reducing greenhouse gases. So at the conclusion of this study, we're going to provide a comprehensive community-based social marketing plan strategy and a toolkit that the city can use to really develop a really robust marketing plan. Now, at the end of phase one, which is where we're at right now, we conducted really extensive outreach to identify the barriers and the benefits, but also to better understand the community and the community's actions, and maybe where they're not currently taking action. So this little arrow here says, we are here. This is where we're at now. We basically did a bunch of listening. We're at the end of our listening phase. And if you don't know what CBSM is, I'm not going to use acronyms, it's community-based social marketing. And what this is it's a way to market to people based on the way they are most likely to adjust their behaviors. When it comes to environmental and climate change, this is the best way to try to change people's behaviors, because first you really do your research. We identify what behaviors to research around, then identify what are the barriers and benefits to taking those actions, and only then do you develop strategies. But along the way, you're constantly tapping back into the community to make sure that what you're doing is not only effective, but is resonating with the community. We're not, in short, it's not creating a marketing strategy in a silo. Now, these were the 5 CAP actions we selected to do this research on. So we went through a really extensive process. Sarah will laugh. We had 19 million different Excel sheets trying to figure out what should we focus this research on? What's the most impactful things? What are the actions that are going to be hard to change, et cetera? We narrowed in on these 5. And we narrowed in on these 5 because they have the potential to create deep greenhouse gas emissions reductions. They don't already have big city initiatives behind them. And if they do, there's not a lot of momentum behind them yet, or we think we can do more. And then finally, they're not easy to change behaviors. How many of you, by show of hands, rode your bike or walked to this meeting today? Okay, we have some.
Pretty cool.
That's great, right? It's a hard to change behavior. So that's exactly one of the things we focused on. Now, I want to just note that while our survey and focus groups were focused on all of these specific behaviors, our conversations went really broad. People were really hungry to talk about, in general, LED lighting and recycling and all kinds of different things that we were not specifically asking them about. So rather than lose all that knowledge, some of those findings are included here around different pieces, but we are focusing on these 5 activities. And so our presentation will be about those, that people are hungry to talk about the environment.
So we did, and as Jessica just mentioned, we did really do an extensive outreach to the community. And because we really wanted to ensure that we heard from individuals across the community, across sectors, and just across the full diverse landscape. And so we really conducted one-on-one interviews, we conducted focus groups, and we really tried to connect with as many community leaders as possible that had large bases within the community to really expand our listening and to ensure that we were hearing from diverse groups. So we believe that this multi-pronged approach really made us successful in really hearing from a broad range of the community.
In the presentation, you'll see there's a list of the community-based organizations that were engaged. Now, because one of our charges, a key charge, is to figure out how are the people most impacted by climate change and disconnected populations. What do they think? What do they do? How can they be involved? Well, our strategy to make sure we can communicate with them and include them was to do those focus groups, but also was to work through community-based organizations. So I want to come out front and say that our survey responses do not capture the exact demographics of Iowa City. It was way too limited in African American inclusion and Asian inclusion. However, while the survey responses don't capture those ideas and perspective of all demographic groups of vulnerable populations in this city, our outreach to community-based organizations and focus groups, we think really did capture and had us able to listen to a very diverse perspectives, from business to individuals, to communities of color, to immigrant communities. And so while the survey responses are way overly skewed towards those well-off and even making over $100,000 a year, our outreach to these community-based organizations gave us a really diverse perspective.
So what we want to do is we really want to start by presenting some of the global findings and trends that came out of all of our community outreach and engagement. So these findings are an aggregate of everything we heard from surveys to a meeting with the community. What we really heard from residents and businesses is that they feel a real deep connection to the green initiatives taking place in Iowa. And they're really excited to see what the city is doing and making progress in these areas. So this quote actually came from a focus group from one of our monolingual Congolese focus groups where, oh, I'm so sorry. This actually came from a different focus group. But we kept hearing phrases like, we're a treasure and a diamond in the middle of Iowa. So people are really excited to hear about what the city is doing, and they're really proud of the work that the city is doing. So that was great to hear. What we also heard is that people are just unsure how to make the biggest impact. So although that they feel really connected to the work that the city is doing, they're not really sure how to participate in activities that are both good for the environment and greenhouse gas emissions, because they just really are unsure of where to find information or what actions actually make the greatest positive impact. So that leads us also to, there's a lack of overall awareness for residents and businesses on where to find information. So for example, many residents really want to reduce their greenhouse gas energy use in their home, but they don't know what changes to make to really make that big impact, or the relative cost savings that will actually be realized if those changes are made. And so they also are really confused on where to go to purchase materials, or really how to make those changes, or even what contractors to connect with. So without this access to information, it makes it really difficult for them to make the changes that are needed to really make a big impact. And then what we also heard from individuals is that they want to take action, and they are taking action on the things that they can see that direct result of, even if those results aren't what they seem. So for example, what we heard from a lot of residents and businesses is that they see recycling as an action that they can take personally to make that direct impact. But as we've heard, is recycling doesn't have the actual results that really make the big impact. But it's because it's directly and linearly connected to their actions, they think that it's something that is really good for the environment. So we want to ensure that we're making people really motivated to change their actions.
Some other big global findings. One is that there is initiative confusion and exhaustion. And so you all have done so much and have been really effective at reducing greenhouse gases. Residents and businesses are confused on which initiatives to prioritize. They're also confused by the effectiveness or efficacy of those things because they haven't heard of them. So often we heard from people saying, like the Greater Home Builders Association, when we met with them, they said, haven't we done this already? Didn't we already do this? Or why are we talking about this? Or, oh, the city tried that. I don't think it worked because we never heard about it after the fact. And so there's this sense, even if it's just perceived, that there's too much going on and that there's there's new activities happening because maybe the other ones weren't effective. When you all know in this room, the reality is that you've been very effective. A few things maybe haven't made the same impact you wanted them to make, but we haven't communicated it back to the public. There's also public frustration at the perceived lack of progress, which is kind of what I mentioned. But because of the fact that people have not felt like they've heard the impact of the various initiatives or efforts, there's a sentiment that easy to change behaviors haven't been fully adopted. So they're like, why is the city moving forward? First, they should focus on, I don't know, doing community cleanups or recycling or these things that they perceive as low-hanging fruit, albeit those things will not make a big impact on greenhouse gases.
We also found that costs are a key barrier for both businesses and residents, specifically with regard to how they are implemented. The barriers greatest for low-income individuals who don't have disposable income to participate in some of the desired behaviors. We have to then thoughtfully message any action that requires any outlay of funds to avoid making the behavior perceived as a luxury tax recommendation that's only available to the people who are well off. What's more is when we think about the notion of cost, we should also think about emotional, psychological, or inconvenience costs. So for example, like though the fiscal implications of taking public transit may not appear to be a huge barrier, the perceived costs associated with inconvenience or lack of control or autonomy or the increased time commitment that it could take, particularly over time, has to be taken into account as new marketing materials are created.
So during our research phase, we also found that there are some really specific trends that are different based on our audience segments. So you probably also saw that in the report. And we want to make sure that we bring light to these because these are going to be important moving forward into phase 2, as different audience segments have different barriers and concerns and needs that are going to motivate them and to really adjust their actions and to take action. So this is the quote that came from our Center for Workers' Justice focus group, where we spoke with a contingent of French Congolese individuals. And what we found was that we heard from people that they really want to know why taking action matters. So businesses and residents, they're really interested in hearing that underlying why. And why they should take these actions, why it matters to them, and how it's relevant to their lives before ever hearing about what actions to take or how they should actually take them. So for renters, we had the opportunity to speak with several renters. And what we heard from them is they really felt like they didn't have control over, and actually this also came up quite a bit in our surveys, and I just want to make note of that, is that renters really don't feel like they have control over many of those high impact activities. And so for example, they feel like they don't have access to changing their appliances. They don't have the ability to update their insulation in their homes. And so they really want to, since they don't have control over those actions, they really want to know what they can do to make a difference in their home. And what we kind of noticed that is a lot of the CAP actions really aren't speaking to those renters in general. So we want to ensure that we can include them in some way. We also really heard from renters is that they are concerned about advocating for themselves to their landlords. So they were concerned that if they really start to advocate for those new appliances, that new insulation, to really make those upgrades, that they're going to end up having to have that cost burden through a rental increase. And that cost burden, many of our renters said that they would not be able to afford, higher levels of rent. And so that was a big concern for them. We also had the ability to speak with an awesome group of University of Iowa students. And we also had the opportunity to speak with some people like Stratus, but our students were so incredible. They really talked about how eager they are to participate in the city's activities. They want to be involved in the initiatives. They really want to play a role. And they really want to be able to use those alternative forms of transportation. They really want to green their apartments. They want to expand recycling. But what they mentioned is that a lot of times some of these activities are really inaccessible to them because those activities take a higher level of cost. And as we know, being students, cost is a really big deal. They usually don't have extra funds to spend. So for them, cost of making those changes are a huge motivating factor for them. And so they really care about the environment, but they want to know what they can do with those limited funds. So if it means not driving their car, they won't drive their car, and they want to be able to know that they can save money on gas and help the environment. We also heard similarly for student renters is that they really feel disempowered over their living conditions. So similar to the other contingency of renters we spoke with, many of them feel like they really want to help with the environment, but they're unable to because of the control that's placed over them for their landlords in their housing.
I want to just add to what Natalie's saying, and that students not only at times were using the words such as disempowered, but they feel underutilized. And I think they might be underutilized because they really do care. They want to be involved, but the things they've heard that they can get involved in cost money. And so they feel underutilized, and it is a potential opportunity for the city.
Thank you. Yes. We also really had a great opportunity to speak with many nonprofits within the area. So I mentioned Center for Workers' Justice, and we talked to the Affordable Housing Coalition and several others that provide direct services. And especially we spoke with several that provide those direct services to the large immigrant population within the Iowa city. And so we had, again, the opportunity to have a focus group with a all monolingual French speaking Congolese immigrants, which was so incredible. And these conversations really provided us with some insight on the specific barriers that were really impacting immigrants. So what we heard from these focus groups and these individuals is that our immigrant populations are getting information from trusted individuals and sources within the community. So our community-based organizations are serving that informal role of communicators and disseminating information that comes from the city. So they'll take those city emails, they'll put them in the language that works best for their populations, and they'll disseminate it out to the group. And so that's really how a lot of these individuals are gaining access and understanding what's taking place. We also heard a lot about bike safety. So when talking about taking alternative forms of transportation, we heard specifically a lot from individuals from the Sudanese community that say that there were several physical and cultural barriers in place to riding bikes. And so for these individuals, like what we heard is that for a lot of women, the way that bikes are set up that are from the Sudanese community, they're unable to ride them because if they're wearing skirts, it will, the length of their skirt will go up too high, and so they're unable to. Also, several of the immigrants that we spoke with said that they have just never learned how to ride a bike, or it's not a common practice in their country of origin or currently. And so bike safety and learning how to ride bikes is really important for them.
Now, for homeowners, on the survey that we put out, the majority of respondents indicated that they are very interested in saving energy in their home. But the key takeaway is they don't know how, they don't know the most impactful activity. They also are savvy and want to know the return on investment of those actions. And so homeowners also really shared that they are willing to do something if they can be told how and why, and if it's not going to cost them a lot up front. So upfront costs were a huge barrier. But now this one here, I want to kind of highlight. Homeowners are invested in the life cycle of their appliances and equipment. What we mean by this is during the survey, 69% of them reported that the cost of replacing and removing appliances was the biggest factor determining whether or not they would replace something. Because if it's going to be very expensive, they're just going to wait until theirs dies. But then they also shared, of course, I wouldn't get rid of something that works yet, because wouldn't that be bad for the landfill? So a lot of people, students, people with master's degrees, homeowners, immigrants, everyone was like, why would you get rid of something that works if you're literally just going to contribute to the landfills? Because a lot of these things can't just be recycled, right? And that a lot of that's perception, and a lot of that might be truth, but it's a perception that's out there. And there's a lot of confusion about why they would do that, which is an opportunity around marketing. And then finally, homeowners don't know how to access the year-round grant cycle. There was a lot of people mentioned, hey, well, there's that once a year grant that we could get to help pay for some of the upfront costs for our appliances and equipment, but we missed the deadline. Well, turns out it is year-round, but there's miscommunication, or they don't know that. Now, in speaking to ICAD, the Downtown Business Association, and some local businesses such as Midwest One, and through our survey data, we saw some trends for businesses. One of the quotes here, partner with us, don't regulate us, right? So there is a sense that businesses recognize that their actions are very important, and they have the potential to reduce greenhouse gases. They want to be a partner. They're frustrated that they perceive over-regulation and ever-changing policies instead of communication and partnership and conversation. And so I think there is, again, an opportunity to get businesses to be a bigger part of the conversation. On the survey, this is one of the questions. What motivates your business decisions most? Well, saving and making money, that was expected. Most people said that, but also being a part of and supporting the community. That is the second selection people made. So again, just like how people love Iowa City, businesses want to be part of the community. So there's an opportunity to utilize that to better communicate and get people to take actions. Other things with businesses, they're of course very interested in participating in city initiatives, but they need to know how their upfront costs can be recuperated. If If it's too expensive, you're going to lose people. Also, companies that have facilities across multiple jurisdictions, they need support navigating multiple companies or multiple different policies across different cities or areas or companies. An example of this is a lot of companies said to us, oh, well, we'd love to use solar or use clean energy, but we don't know how to do so because there's multiple utilities and they don't partner. Well, it turns out they do partner, but those companies don't know about it. Other organizations told us that there's no partnership in place with the city transit, so it's hard for them to do a carpool thing with their employees. Again, that's also changing now. So how are we going to communicate that to people? And then a big one for businesses right now, they're still, as all of us are, really in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, trying to survive, working from multiple places. And so I think some of the responses we got are COVID exhaustion, and it might just really show that this can't be a priority for them right now. It doesn't mean it won't be or shouldn't be in the future.
So for landlords, we had the opportunity to speak with the Greater Iowa City Apartments Association. And this conversation, what we really heard from them is that the bottom line and cost efficiency is a major priority for them. But many of them are not opposed to introducing environmental practices into their building. In fact, many of them were really excited about the initiatives taking place. They just really, because of their focus on cost efficiency, for items that they're trying to install items at the lowest cost possible, right? So for their appliances, they're just looking for the most cost efficient, lowest cost items. And so this does really create a barrier for them because in purchasing energy efficient items, because a lot of times they're more expensive. And so there is an opportunity to maybe partner with landlords to support them in creating some more cost efficient incentives. Landlords also mentioned, and Jessica also mentioned this as well, is that landlords as well as other individuals feel overregulated, so that they have the perception that sometimes the city will frequently intervene in some of their private property. And the example of that would be around the frustration regarding some of the recycling practices. So where we did hear that when their spaces were removed to implement those new recycling bins, there was some frustration over that. We also heard from community-based organizations is that they're really eager to participate in the city's initiatives, and they really, really want to be more engaged with the city in supporting vulnerable populations, because they really do that more than no one else can. Oops, sorry. No worries. And so there is a great opportunity for the city to really partner more with these community-based organizations and nonprofits, because right now they're like, we're underutilized. We'll communicate more. We'll do more outreach for you. We're excited about this. The people that we're involved with are really excited about this. So there is absolutely an opportunity to engage more with diverse populations and to really work with CBOs on that.
All right, so since we looked at those 5 actions, we now talked about the various segments of the population. We want to just talk briefly. I'm going to kind of fly through these slides. Natalie, I'm just going to go through these really quickly, okay? So for these slides, we're going to talk about the barriers and benefits for each action, but also some potential recommendations we just want to highlight. So the first action was, how willing are people and what are the barriers in place and benefits to replacing appliances and equipment with energy efficient ones? Of course, as we shared, upfront costs is huge, but there's also this belief that the impact on the landfill is worse than the greenhouse gases of using old appliances. So people want to know, what should they do? Should they really get rid of something that is still working, but maybe highly inefficient? And then if so, what's the city's plan for mitigating that negative impact on the landfill? And so there's a lot of strategies that could be used, right? Packaging and communicating the credits and the rebates and how to make it cost efficient, but also really developing collateral to explain the fact that it is going to be better to buy new energy efficient appliances than keep that old guzzling refrigerator in your garage. So one opportunity here is when we ask, what's the oldest or least efficient appliance or piece of equipment in your home? Most people said their HVAC system. This is exciting because we also talked a lot about insulation. We asked if people would be, what were the barriers to doing or using insulation or adding more insulation or assessing their insulation. Well, people didn't really even think about that as an environmentally friendly activity. Or they think, oh, I already have insulation, but they don't recognize that it might be packed down or rat eaten now, right? So there's an opportunity to, again, communicate with people the benefits of this and the cost savings that can happen, but also provide those incentives upfront to pay the upfront costs. We also really need to find a way to make this make sense financially for landlords, because if they don't realize the financial benefit, if they're not the one paying the utilities, it's literally just a cost that just gets sunk that they don't have an incentive, literally an incentive to pay for that. When we ask people about biking and using carpools and walking, the community members are interested. Businesses are also interested in figuring out how to improve employee health and well-being and increasing employee satisfaction. And a lot of people are still remote working. So there's possibly an opportunity here. COVID fast-tracked remote work. So how can that be maintained? How can we have less people driving all over the place? I'm going to gloss over this one, but in short, let me show you this slide here. When we ask people about the biggest factor that prevents them from biking to various destinations, people said safety concerns. They do not feel safe. They either don't think that the sidewalk infrastructure is in place, or it's too far, or they'd have to go through some community they don't think is well lit. Most of the reasons they don't feel safe was about infrastructure. It was not necessarily we don't like biking, but a lot of people also didn't know how to ride a bike or felt like it wasn't something that was for them. And when we ask what's your primary mode of transportation, driving a personal vehicle is, of course, the number one thing people said. But I want to actually highlight this for Iowa City. There's a lot of people that bike and a lot of people that walk. And so I wanted to look at the data, looking at the American Community Survey. When you look at Iowa City compared to similarly small size city, the ACS showed that people who use commuting, who walk as a commuting method, 15.5% of workers walk to work. In average, in small cities of similar sizes, less than 1% do that, right? And so that shows that Iowa City already has huge gains when it comes to walking and biking. How can we capitalize on them? How can we expand upon them? You're already doing so much. Natalie, I'll pass this one back to you.
Interject. This is a good opportunity for us to do things, for us to look at programs like Car-Free Iowa City that's currently in development, and figure out how can we make a program that already has, excuse the pun, legs, and really communicate on something like that in a meaningful way, so that more people know about it and become engaged with it. Sorry, go ahead.
Great, thanks, Steve. What we also heard is for the creating a zero waste office, the sustainability office did ask us to assess if there's an appetite from businesses to create a zero waste office. So through our research and our focus groups and listening revealed that there's really not an appetite for this at this time, because they're really not seeing, I think the impact of COVID, right? People are just trying to get back into the office. So they're not seeing the real meaning behind going to a zero waste office. But many of the businesses that we spoke with, although they're not interested in the zero waste office, they are really interested in being and participating in those larger scale initiatives. So so that is great news. But yes, at this time, they're not really interested in that zero waste office. So when we asked individuals about their willingness to repair household goods and reduce their household waste, what we heard is that residents, they know that reducing their household waste helps the environment, and it may actually help them save money and support that reuse culture, but they're just not fully aware of what the impact that reducing their waste actually makes on the environment. So one of our strategies is that we're suggesting is to really ensure that residents have really high levels of education to understand the whole process surrounding reusing or reducing waste within their home, so that they really understand the impact that it has on greenhouse gas emissions.
Great, thanks. So I want to get into some potential program recommendations. As I said before, building on the existing walking and biking culture in Iowa City in order to reduce greenhouse gases is a huge opportunity. The program already has legs, as Steve so intelligently shared. Another one is to potentially develop an initiative focused on HVAC systems and insulation, because the majority of people said the HVAC system is their oldest equipment in their home. And we know that insulation has potential to really reduce greenhouse gases. There's an opportunity there about heating and cooling in the home. And again, these are potential recommendations. We are not yet to our strategy creation, but we want to share these after phase 1 is over. The third one, to develop and communicate rolling greenhouse gas reduction grant activities for businesses and homes. People did not necessarily know they existed, or they didn't know that it was a rolling application process. And then finally, develop regional braided funding for CAP initiatives. In speaking to various government entities and organizations such as ICAD, there's some opportunities to braid some funding sources to develop programs moving forward, which would be more impactful, which would also engage the people who are, ambassadors of this work, and engage more people and get more sustainable funding to do some of this work. You're on mute, Steve. Sorry, technology.
Throughout our listening campaign, some of the feedback that we heard, whether directly or indirectly, was about where, when, how, and how often respondents were communicated with. As we continue to audit past, present, and planned communications, some of the challenges that we have to bear in mind are perceptions of either a disparate or unrelated or overly dense communications without clear unifying theme or clear overarching relationship to what's come before, or not enough messaging about how or why in communications, or enough of a direct link to the ultimate impact on GHG emissions, or a lack of clarity about the progress. And this is, have heard this over and over again about the progress being made or the state of current efforts. We realize that some of these may actually be media issues or reach issues, but it's important to frame our recommendations within this context.
Great, thanks. So while phase 1 was about listening, I'm going to continue on with potential communications recommendations and know that formal recs will be made in the next phase. Okay, so messaging needs to focus on reciprocal upstream and downstream calls to action. And what I mean by this is different people can make different actions, which will eventually cause someone else to have to maybe change their actions. Okay, it could be a push and a pull. The example would be for home builders and contractors, right? Well, they typically install the cheapest appliances in order to reduce costs. However, if they're provided with the resource that expanded the benefits of high efficiency appliances and energy efficient equipment, they might be more willing to purchase high energy efficient products, et cetera. Or the other side of it could be that home buyers and renters could be educated about potential cost savings available when energy efficient appliances are put in, which would then increase the demand and them asking, hey, contractors, like, please put in energy efficient things on the front end. So there's a push and a pull. So marketing and communication can be done to both groups with a different message with the end result. And they would both impact each other positively. They would both move the tide forward, but it would be a different message to a contractor and a landlord versus a homeowner or a renter. Sorry, Natalie.
Oh, that's okay. What we heard from individuals across the board is that they're hungry to hear directly from the city. So we know that you communicate, we know that there is so much information, but they're really eager to hear more about the impact that the city has made in their current initiatives. And so really one of our recommendations is to continue and better highlight the progress and the achievements made through the CAP initiatives. So by providing more updates on the progress, by communicating with residents through email, social messaging, those direct engagement through ambassadors, and really attending those nonprofit collaborative meetings. We attended several, and they were just so excited to hear about what the city was doing. They were so excited to be involved, engaged, and they felt really more connected to the city's initiatives when they heard directly from even someone like me, who's just a direct conduit for the city at the time. And so really, we're also, to do this more, we really believe that engaging community communications through ambassadors by attending more of those meetings and to increase awareness on what the city is doing would be a really effective way for the city to really highlight all of the great work that you're doing at this time with your initiatives, and to continue to increase engagement with those nonprofits and individuals.
I just want to share to y'all that every single individual or group we spoke to said, thank you so much for coming and talking to us. Natalie got told, even like right after someone lambasted us about what we should be doing or what's not happening, then they were like, thank you so much for coming. It's so great to be working directly with the city. So people are excited to be communicated with and want more of it. So as we said, we can leverage those community partnerships to reach a broader audience. You don't have to do it alone. The city does not have the staff. Sarah does not have the staff to do all of this alone, but we can increase utilization of these nonprofits and the existing ambassadors to increase the reach. Also, we have to rethink the ways we communicate with traditionally hard to reach populations. There's alternative media outlets and forms of communication, such as Nextdoor. There's also a lot of the CBOs, these community-based organizations we spoke to, who are translating things on their own and sending out their own newsletters. What mini micro ways can we use micro influencers and community leaders to communicate with those most impacted by climate change? And of course, as we shared throughout, we really need to customize our call to action, there's an acronym, our call to action messaging by and for target segments. Just like I said, you can't communicate with the landlord the way you would a student renter. They have different calls to action.
Yeah, this process has helped reveal opportunities for both programmatic and communications framework. It's also helped inform how we might approach messaging, from making direct linear connections between the actions and the specific impacts that they create, past, present, and future, to how we can leverage community pride of place throughout our messaging, to the need to infuse urgency and immediacy to all communications. We have a number of messaging insights as a springboard, and from these insights, we can continue to strategically build and position a unifying theme and a corresponding icon. One other significant consideration, particularly as we look to achieve our goals relative to diversity and inclusion, is about asset-based versus deficit-based framing. Essentially, instead of defining people by the problems or challenges, their deficit, vulnerable populations, marginalized communities, people most at risk, we can look to frame our communications about and to them through their aspirations and their contributions. You'll see more about this as we move forward further into phase 2 and phase 3.
Steve, you hopped the slides. I just want to make sure there's nothing on here we want to educate. As we said earlier, of course, one of the recommendations is just use education to facilitate behavior change. The action starts with awareness, right? And awareness really starts with visibility. So the same reason people are so excited to recycle and kept talking to us about recycling is because it's visible. They throw things into a blue bin and they see it fill up and think, wow, look what I did. How can we make other hard to change behaviors as visible, as visceral, as real and tangible for people, right? And then, of course, simple resources must accompany call to actions. I'll give you a direct example because the stories speak volumes. While speaking to the school district, they had just gone through a facilities master plan. And they said to us, oh, I wish there was just a how to green our facility toolkit that just said, here's the 5 things you should do. And then Midwest One did the same thing. Oh, I wish there was just some simple resource that said, do this and print out these stickers and put them here or put these strips there. People are busy. How can we make it simple, and not do everything, but do for the actions we've decided are the most impactful, really make some simple tools to make those call to actions more simple and tangible. Now, Steve, I'll hop back to this slide for you.
So I'm going to end where we began, which is to tell you where we are in this process. You guys may be familiar with this this graphic that we've created, this hourglass, where we take in all of the listening and all of the learning and all of the hearing that we've done. And at this phase, we're synthesizing those into a variety of different strategic recommendations and considerations. And what's next for us is that we're going to develop a brand strategy recommendation and a marketing strategy recommendation that speaks to both messaging as well as how we implement that messaging, and some creative campaign themes that lives at the center of this hourglass, from which then all other communications can move forward. So that's kind of where we are. We'll open it back up now to questions.
Yeah, I'll open it for questions. And then I just want to share something that all of us have been saying as framing as we jump into these questions, which is that community-based social marketing, and in our opinion, most marketing is only impactful when the community is engaged in all aspects of the project, from research through implementation, right? And so we did our due diligence, we've been listening, but now we want to create the strategy. So what questions do y'all have?
Questions? Anyone?
I see the next steps, but what is sort of the anticipated timeline for those next steps?
Great question. We anticipate developing our round of marketing strategies for review, approval, and then from those marketing strategies, once we get that approved, we'll present some campaign themes, and that'll happen over the course of the next 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay, thank you.
I guess my question is, how are you able to come up with a I guess I get the thing about developing a campaign, and just not that I know everything. I did work in communications for about 15 years, and now I'm a sustainability coordinator. So my position is somewhat similar to Sarah's. So I've kind of been involved in both sides of those things. And if there seems to be some really significant gaps, and I guess, you guys are in communications, it's not your job to fix all the gaps, that you're hearing. There's certain disconnects, there's some lack of programs to make the actual changes that people want. So I guess I'm not clear how that can be developed in the next 4 to 6 weeks when there's some pretty significant behind the scenes things that aren't yet addressed.
I want to start, and then I'll pass it to you, Steve. I think this is the challenge of doing a presentation about, the findings. If we came in here and only told you all the pretty flowering things, you'd say, why'd we hire these consultants? There's no gaps, there's no challenges. Like, what was this? There's a lot of amazing things Iowa City is doing, and the gaps that we presented, we believe that having some unifying theme begins to solve some of the gaps that were identified. For example, when people have said, there's so many communications, or it's too disparate. What is the city doing? Or didn't we do that last year? A unifying theme would say, hey, under this umbrella, we're doing X, Y, and Z. And here's one of those things, right? So a unifying campaign, unifying brand is one of the solutions and one of the things that can begin to close the gap. And Steve, do you want to add to that?
No, absolutely. And that's part of the reason that we're putting the marketing strategy before we get to the campaign theme, because one of the things we want to try to do is make sure that we are speaking to the right people with the right message. For example, we could try to speak to everyone and with the same voice. And while that might feel easiest, it may not have the greatest impact. So we might have a segmentation strategy that really starts to speak to the people who, rather than speaking to the most residents, will speak to the residents who care the most. And the way that we speak to them, and the frequency and the thoroughness or the comprehensiveness of what we're saying to that group might be very different than how we speak to the people who are otherwise disenfranchised or who don't feel as though they are empowered to change the insulation in their home because they're renters. So and figuring out who we're speaking to and what we're saying helps us figure out what the umbrella and what's important, helps us figure out what the campaign theme is, and then figure out what are the messaging strategies to fill in these gaps where A, there are gaps, or B, just as importantly, to showcase what fantastic progress we've made along the way. Because I think a lot of what's missing here isn't that we're not doing the right thing or that we haven't been doing the right thing. It's that people don't know how much progress is being made and what their role in that progress is and could be.
And I agree. And you all have done a great job of talking to these different groups. And I apologize, I didn't begin with that compliment because you have done that. I guess one thing in particular that then, since you are concerned and focused on the segmentation, is you had that one graph that showed with the businesses, their top concern or motivator is something like saving money, but their concern about the environment is at like 7%. And so that tells me that they may not be convinced that we are truly in a climate crisis. So as that is addressed, I hope, as you address that audience, I hope that can be impressed on them. And, our programs here were gutted a couple of years, not gutted, but they were cut in half, some of the rebate programs. So I think what they want the city to do is what used to happen within some of the utilities within the industry, what some of the businesses want. And as much as I wish we could hand them, there was an example, I don't know, one of the banks wanted a list of 5 simple things to do. It just, unfortunately, I'm not sure it can ever be that simple. But yeah, that was the one, that reducing our environmental impact. If that's at 7%, I think that needs to really be addressed.
I think this is where, look at the second thing now. The second thing is being a part of and supporting our community. And this is why messaging and marketing is so important. Because what if the way that they can be a part of something and support their community is by being part of a green business initiative, or by XYZ, fill in the blank for what the action is. But I think this is why messaging is so important. Because you wouldn't go to a business and lead with that environmental piece, and maybe we'd lead with something else. Steve, you're actively thinking with your face.
Well, I'm going to echo what someone wise, someone in this room said just recently, that yes, we often hear people want a silver bullet, and rather than it being a silver bullet, I think Sarah so eloquently put it last week that this is more of a buckshot approach, so that that if they're all coming out of the same gun or the same campaign, right, then all of these different messages will have, just to take a metaphor way too far, but to that buckshot approach would actually be a variety of different types of messages that really feel unified, not only through their community engagement, but through the volume and breadth of the messaging that we're going to be trying to create.
Does anyone on Zoom also have questions? You can either type them in or you can just take yourself off mute. Casey or Ben or Jesse. All right. Any other questions, clarifying, clarifying questions, or just ideas? Because I also would love to just, if we spark some idea in you, we'd love to open it up to exciting potential ideas or aha moments as well.
Right. Do you see the going through this process at some point identifying not just opportunities for kind of further engagement, but also items that maybe should be weeded out? So for instance, if we're trying to do too much all at once, and we can start to prioritize, but you also see the recommendations coming for what may be places that we should dial back and not provide that focus, just because of how I don't know how things are messaged or how things are received, or the perception of it's going to take this much effort in order to get to that result. that sort of thing?
I do see that some of it may not be about pulling back actual messaging, but figuring out what are the best media tactics to employ. So, for example, I have a printout of one of the postcards that was done a year or two ago, and it just tried to do too much. It wanted to tell people, well, do this, and if you can't do this, you can also do this, 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 and this, and it really tried to do too much for a postcard. So what we need to do is figure out what the uses of each particular media communication or marketing tool, and then figure out how best we can make the calls to action work harder for us. So we're envisioning, one of the things that we're envisioning is ways for people to quickly and easily be able to drill down into further information, and giving them the tools to do so.
And then to piggyback on that, when it came to specific actions, maybe we want to dial back on or not do. I mean, we definitely identified some of that stuff. One of the ones is what Natalie talked about, is their appetite for businesses to become zero use, oh my gosh, I'm blanking, to use disposables in the office.
Zero waste office.
Thank you. To become a zero waste office. And the answer is no, there's not an appetite for that. So don't waste your time doing a huge campaign around becoming a zero waste office. But during our conversations, a lot of people, were interested in, well, what could we do that can make a big impact? Or what could we do? What could we be part of? Maybe there's a green business certification, which is even bigger and much more impactful if they did a list of things and then we're a green business in Iowa City, which is a totally different opportunity with even more impact. So there's definite things that we identified that would not be, it's not something to make a campaign around today. And around biking, we know there's a huge appetite for it. And without the infrastructure investment, which I know the city is well aware of, right? A lot of people might be wary of hopping on a bike, or not know how, or be Sudanese, not be able to, et cetera. But we've identified some of those challenges now.
Yeah, I think part of this process, and part of this, specifically part of this very next part of the process, is figuring out among all of the initiatives. And we have a lot of, Iowa City has a lot of great initiatives underway. So figuring out which ones we want to be, whether it's Climate Fest or the Ambassadors Program or Earth Day or Project 51, and how we leverage those really fantastic substantive programs in ways that have that continue to speak to the community over the course of the year, and can be frameworks around which there will be greater impact.
I think, and by the way, I appreciate very much your report today. I thought it was very, very well done. I appreciate your analysis. I like your hourglass. I think one of the challenges that we face is there are really two hourglasses. One's like a 30-year hourglass, and one's a 4-month hourglass.
Mm-hmm.
Along the way, we need to celebrate. And at the same time, we don't want to give our audiences the false impression that we've done so well, that we've been successful and we've completed. We're done. We've done well and we're done. What's happening is we've done really well, and we need to communicate that, and at the same time, in a very positive way, show that the next steps are even going to be harder than the first steps. The first steps, and we've got some reporting to do about our success. Those reports aren't official yet, but they'll be out shortly. Some things that we do want to celebrate, and we have to celebrate carefully so that we can show people this is a successful effort in a first step that's got another 30 years of work attached to it. That's why I think this discussion about umbrella, branding, are really important, so we can continue our story beyond this first effort. This is I would almost see this as a continuous improvement project that we're marketing. And that's hard to sell sometimes.
It is a long game. And I also I'll use an example to hopefully assuage the concern of, like, how do we do the long game and the short game at the same time? I was a community organizer for 10 years doing refugee rights issues in Ghana, then immigration reform in San Diego, and helping unionize laborers in Guatemala. Any campaign or any movement you start, the way you do it is through engagement of new people, right? So think of the freedom riders. The first thing they did wasn't the biggest thing they did. The first thing they did was a little sit-in. And then they did a bigger sit-in and then a bigger one. And you know what I'm saying? So the little engagements along the way build the base of people who are willing to take bigger steps. And so while what we've done so far might have been easier than what is to come, we're not losing people. And what we need to make sure we do is along the way, make sure that people say, wow, we did that and we celebrated it and we succeeded it. You know, what else can we do? Instead of saying it's done, how do we tap them back in, everyone back in, to make sure that we continue to do more and are continuing the movement? But we do need that celebration, because if there's no celebration, it's too dire. No one wants to stay engaged. No one wants to stay involved because, oh, we did that one sit-in and no impact was made. No journalists, I'm using this example, but no journalists covered it. Why should we continue?
Well,
you have to make some.
There's a real risk of having a fatalist, having an exclusively fatalistic approach to something as dire as climate action or climate change, because we do, you know, at least the people in this room all have a real clarity about the dire nature of what we're trying to do. That said, we're also making some progress towards reduction, particularly Iowa City has been a beacon in making progress towards its stated goals or exceeding its stated goals. So not celebrating those things would be a miss on our part, because in the celebration of those things is where we start to create new cheerleaders, new ambassadors, new people who will take action and in part take larger action because of the notion that it is framed in success, not dire or failure.
And one thing really struck me, Sarah and I were talking the other day about what we really need to attack to get big gains, and it's not recycling. We certainly want to continue with recycling. And I appreciate what you said about the visibility of colorful containers and look what I've done. And there it is. And that's fine. The challenge is like insulation. And as Sarah told me the other day, electric vehicles, those are two areas. And one thing you pointed out today is the landlords don't care about insulation because their renters pay the heat bills.
Right.
And that's a real challenge. And how we're going to market toward that, I don't know, but that's one of your challenges. And EV, students don't see that as something they can do. Riding bicycles is wonderful and we should promote it. And everyone ought to be driving electric vehicles that do drive and don't bicycle. That's a tough marketing challenge. So I would urge you to look at those two areas because they're not easy, and they're not just with a couple of colorful containers that everyone can get excited by. And it's part of the long game, but it's also part of the short game.
Mm-hmm.
I would actually counsel towards a different focus or an additional focus in the next round. I would say, like, over the course of the years of this commission, one of the things that we started off late not really addressing is the adaptation side of things, much more in favor of the mitigation. And I still think even to this day, we have a bigger blind spot on engaging the community-based organizations. And so that was one of the segments in your report. And I think that one is a place where we could use particular guidance or advice on how to best leverage these groups. And so that's a comment. I have a question that's also related to the segments that you identified in your report. Do these emerge sort of organically from examining your findings, or did you go in with sort of these groups in mind? And then within these groups, did you find a lot of agreement, or like within businesses, there was a lot of divergent views? Were the groups sort of coherent?
I think think there's always, so first we went in with an idea, with assumptions about what the segments were, but then we further separated. So for example, we had a slide just on immigrant populations because we recognize that to bulk them in with other people who are homeowners or renters, et cetera, was not going to give that population the attention that we felt it deserved. Same goes for renters versus student renters. What's the difference? A lot of difference, right? And so we pulled student renters out. Not all students are renters, but a lot are, right? So we ended up pulling those folks out for different reasons. Were they homogenous? No. There's always difference in thought. And do most homeowners have similar perspectives or similar barriers and benefits? There were trends, is what we can say, which is what the survey data showed us. There were definite trends, there were definite barriers to taking actions and benefits. And so those groups who put them in they had the trends, which is what we presented on. That being said, I think that the biggest differing group is likely going to be homeowners and renters, right? I mean, I think that homeowners have such different concerns and needs when it comes to taking actions than renters do, right? Because renters can't take a lot of the same actions we want to ask a homeowner to make. So there are anyways, I'm saying the same thing again, but there were definite trends.
With regard to adaptation, because I do believe that that's something we do want to underscore and haven't spent a lot of time discussing because we've been talking about mitigation strategies, particularly with regard to the 5 or 6 questions that we asked, and all of our listening was with regard to mitigation strategies, right? With regard to adaptation and particularly with how adaptation and how adaptation becomes part of our everyday vernacular, right? It's got to be a balance, right? And we know that it has to be a balance that is on the other side of the mitigation discussion, right? So or complements the mitigation discussion, right? So it's not either or in a communication. It tends to need to be yes and.
Yeah, I said that particular thing about the community-based organizations because I think there might be greater overlap with adaptation with that segment than other segments. And it's just been a persistent blind spot, I think, with our commission over the years.
Are there any ahas any of you had or any ideas you just want to throw some spaghetti on the wall?
Yeah, I would say that one of the things that I've encountered in directing, in working sustainability for quite a while is that for sure, in researching this, climate communication indicates that you don't want to make people feel like this is a threat that's moved beyond the pale, right? And they get disengaged. They don't want to worry about it when they think it's too big and too dire.
Mm-hmm.
But I find it hard. So I try to get away from messaging that's telling people all the reasons why they should, threatening people into taking climate action. But it's very hard to think about what positive messaging looks like. And how would you engage in a campaign where you talk about climate change as opportunity, where you raise the issue? Like people have to be educated. I take my students all the time in the first week of class and I explain in like 2 minutes what climate change is. It's a really simple idea, but messaging that it's simple, it's serious, and it's solvable. Those things are always how I put climate change, climate science. But the three.
When you said serious, I opened up Siri.
Yeah. No, it's simple, it's serious, and it's solvable. And communicating that, messaging that is really hard though. And I think that I would like to see us really address that head on and saying, like, if people understand what climate change is, I think you can move them then to actions. But just saying, change out your appliance, right? It's a really hard thing to put on a bus or a billboard or message, and that target's changing all the time.
Right.
We need Iowa City that understands.
And I'm sorry for interrupting. There's a distinction. I mean, part of the reason that we believe that this wants and needs a campaign is to do just that. Is to balance the notion of the looming threat with something that feels hopeful. and to provide a context under which more tactical communications, whether it's a bill stuffer insert that might speak to how to read the yellow tag when you go to a home improvement store to buy a new dishwasher, and how to evaluate that, which it still is on mission, but needs to feel incredibly tactical as a strategic communication. And so being able to first create the framework that is not about doom, right, but about hope, progress, and action, is what I think we're focusing on now, out of which some of the more tactical communications can then fall.
Yeah, and I think, to be clear, I think you guys are doing that. I don't think it's a critique, but I think that's the part that we're reading you is creating the framework and the stuff that we can plug into, like, yeah, maybe it might be air source heat pumps, or maybe it might be, you name it, or different tactics in that. But the strategy of, I admittedly am not good at figuring out how do you get people to feel good about and start a movement. As you've mentioned, they've got to get on board.
Right.
And that's what I'm interested to see more than anything. So it's more of a comment of, I'm interested to see that, not that you're not doing it.
And Steve, you've heard Whiffam, what's in it for me? Every one of our constituencies in the end, that's all they want to know.
Right.
I don't care which group, which segment that you've talked about today. Every one of them wants to know the answer to that. This is great, but what's in it for me? And the real marketing expertise, I think, that you can bring forth, and some of it you may not be able to pull off because it's a huge challenge for our whole country, for the globe, is everyone's got to see a bottom line plus for participating in this effort. And
I've never heard of
the
WIFM
challenge.
as an acronym, so thank you for sharing that. I love it.
Yeah.
I know, Sarah, we are at time. Does anyone else have something, not a dying thought, but something else you're dying to share? Not a dying thought.
Well, in the interest of finishing on time, what I would suggest is there is a more in-depth explication of their findings that was included in the agenda packet for this month. I encourage everyone to read it. And if you have any questions or follow-up comments, certainly send them to me and I will forward them on to Cause Impacts.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for your work.
And Cause Impacts, thank you very, very much. This is just a beginning. We're not done chatting, but thank you for putting up with us last month, this month, and we appreciate your presentation today very, very much.
Well, thank you for having us. And like we said, we all want to come to Iowa City and be there for Climate Fest and bike around. So you all are doing an amazing job. So thanks for letting us be part of it.
And unfortunately, we need to move to new business, and those reports have all been put into the packet. So we're going to skip the updates on working groups. Move to number 8, recap of actionable items for commission, working groups, and staff.
We didn't have any direct actionable items come up in the meeting today, so I will just encourage you all to attend Climate Fest next week. We have some really exciting events lined up and some good news to celebrate.
And do we have an motion for adjournment?
I make a motion to adjourn.
First, second,
Seconded.
any discussion? We are adjourned.